What is Art? By Leo Tolstoy, Chapter 3. I begin with the founder of aesthetics, Baumgarten, who lived from 1714 to 1762. For Baumgarten, the object of logical knowledge is truth, and the object of aesthetic knowledge, that is to say knowledge through the senses, is beauty. Beauty is the perfect, the absolute, apprehended by feeling. Truth is the perfect apprehended by reason. Goodness is the perfect attained by moral will. Beauty, as Baumgarten defines it, is correspondence. It is the order of the parts in their relation to one another and in their relation to the whole. And the aim of beauty itself is to please and to awaken desire. That position is the exact opposite of the chief property and mark of beauty according to Kant. As for where beauty appears, Baumgarten holds that we know its highest realization in nature. So for him, the highest task of art is to imitate nature. That position, too, is the exact opposite of what later writers on aesthetics concluded. I pass over the minor followers of Baumgarten, Meyer, Eschenberg, and Eberhard, who only altered their teacher's views a little by separating the pleasant from the beautiful. Instead, I set down the definitions of beauty given by the writers who came immediately after him and defined it in an entirely different way. These writers were Schütz, Sulzer, Mendelssohn, and Moritz. Against Baumgarten's main position, they hold that the aim of art is not beauty, but goodness. So Sulzer, who lived from 1720 to 1779, says that only what contains goodness within it can be counted beautiful. For Sulzer, the aim of the whole life of mankind is the welfare of social life. It is reached by educating the moral sense, and art must be made to serve that end. Beauty is what calls out that sense and trains it. Mendelssohn, who lived from 1729 to 1786, understands beauty in almost the same way. For him, art is the carrying of the beautiful, which feeling grasps only dimly, up to the true and the good, and the aim of art is moral perfection. For the writers of this school, the ideal of beauty is a beautiful soul and a beautiful body. So with them, the division of the perfect, the absolute, into its three forms of truth, goodness, and beauty is wiped out altogether, and beauty merges once more with goodness and truth. But the later writers do not hold on to this understanding of beauty. Instead, we get the aesthetics of Winckelmann, which is again the flat opposite of these views. It cuts the task of art away from the aim of goodness in the sharpest and most decisive manner, and sets up as the aim of art an external beauty, and indeed a merely plastic beauty. Winckelmann lived from 1717 to 1767. In his famous work, The Law and the Aim of All Art is Beauty Alone, wholly separate from goodness and independent of it. And beauty is of three kinds. First, beauty of form. Second, beauty of idea, which in the plastic arts shows itself in the pose of the figure. Third, beauty of expression, which is possible only when the first two conditions are present. This beauty of expression is the highest aim of art, and it was achieved in the art of antiquity. Therefore, the art of today must strive to imitate the art of the ancients. Beauty is understood in the same way by Lessing, by Herder, and later by Goethe, and by all the leading writers on aesthetics in Germany, down to Kant. From Kant onwards, a different understanding of art begins. During this same period, in England, France, Italy, and Holland, independently of the German writers, aesthetic theories of their own were taking shape. They were just as unclear and just as contradictory, but all of them, exactly like the Germans, laid the idea of beauty at the foundation of their thinking, and understood beauty as something absolutely existing, more or less merged with goodness, or springing from the same root. In England, almost at the same time as Baumgarten, and even a little earlier, Shaftesbury, Hutcheson, Hone, Burke, Hogarth, and others were writing about art. For Shaftesbury, who lived from 1670 to 1713, what is beautiful is harmonious and proportionate. What is beautiful and proportionate is true, and what is beautiful and at the same time true is therefore agreeable and good. Beauty, he says, is known by the Spirit alone. God is the fundamental beauty. Beauty and goodness flow from one source. So although Shaftesbury treats beauty as something separate from goodness, it merges with it again into one inseparable thing. For Hutcheson, who lived from 1694 to 1747, in his book on the origin of our ideas of beauty and virtue, the aim of art is beauty, and the essence of beauty lies in the showing of unity within variety. In knowing what beauty is, we are guided by an ethical instinct, an internal sense, and that instinct can run contrary to the aesthetic one. So for Hutcheson, beauty no longer always coincides with goodness. It separates from goodness and can even oppose it. For Home, who lived from 1696 to 1782, beauty is whatever is pleasant, and so beauty is settled by taste alone. The ground of correct taste is this: the greatest richness, fullness, force, and variety of impression should be contained within the narrowest limits. That is the ideal of a perfect work of art. For Burke, who lived from 1730 to 1797, in his inquiry into the origin of our ideas of the sublime and the beautiful are the aim of art, and both rest on the feeling of self-preservation and the feeling of society. Traced back to their sources, these feelings are means of maintaining the race through the individual. The first is served by food, by defense, and by war. The second by intercourse and by breeding. And so self-preservation, and war that goes with it, is the source of the sublime, while society, and the sexual need that goes with it, is the source of beauty. Such are the chief English definitions of art and beauty in the 18th century. In France at the same time, Père André and Batu were writing about art, and later Diderot, D'Alembert, and in part Voltaire. For Père André, in his essay on the beautiful, published in 1741, there are three kinds of beauty: divine beauty, natural beauty, and artificial beauty. For Batu, who lived from 1713 to 1780, art consists in imitating the beauty of nature, and its aim is enjoyment. Diderot's definition of art is the same. What is beautiful is to be decided by taste, just as with the English, and the laws of taste are not merely left unfixed. It is granted that fixing them is impossible. D'Alembert and Voltaire held the same opinion. For the Italian Pagano, writing in the same period, art is the gathering into one of the beauties scattered through nature. The power to see those beauties is taste. The power to bring them together into a single whole is artistic genius. And beauty, for Pagano, merges with goodness in such a way that beauty is goodness made visible, and goodness is inward beauty. Other Italians take a different line. Muratori, who lived from 1672 to 1750, in his reflections on good taste in the sciences and the arts, and above all Spalletti, in his essay on beauty published in 1765, reduce art to an egoistic sensation, founded, as with Burke, on the drive towards self-preservation and towards society. Among the Dutch, Hemsterhuis is worth noting. He lived from 1720 to 1790 and had an influence on the German writers and on Goethe. According to his teaching, beauty is what gives the greatest enjoyment, and what gives the greatest enjoyment is what yields us the greatest number of ideas in the shortest time. Enjoyment of the beautiful is the highest knowledge a man can reach, because it gives the largest quantity of perceptions in the shortest time. Such were the theories of aesthetics outside Germany during the last century. In Germany, after Winckelmann, a wholly new aesthetic theory appears, that of Kant, who lived from 1724 to 1804. Of all of them, it does most to clear up what is really meant by the idea of beauty, and therefore by art. Kant's aesthetics rest on this: man knows nature outside himself, and knows himself in nature. Outside himself in nature he looks for truth, in himself he looks for goodness. The first is the business of pure reason, the second of practical reason, which is freedom. But besides these two instruments of knowledge there is, for Kant, a further faculty, the power of judgment, which forms judgments without concepts and produces pleasure without desire, judgment without a concept, and enjoyment without craving. That faculty is the foundation of aesthetic feeling. And beauty, for Kant, taken subjectively, is what necessarily and generally pleases, without any concept and without any practical benefit. Taken objectively, it is the form of a purposive object so far as that object is perceived without any notion of its purpose. Beauty is defined in the same way by Kant's followers, among them Schiller, who lived from 1759 to 1805. Schiller wrote a great deal on aesthetics, and for him, as for Kant, the aim of art is beauty, whose source is enjoyment without practical use. So art may be called play, not in the sense of a trivial occupation, but in the sense of a showing forth of the beauty of life itself, which has no other aim than beauty. The most notable of Kant's followers in the field of aesthetics were Jean-Paul and Wilhelm von Humboldt. They added nothing to the definition of beauty, but they threw light on its various kinds, on drama, on music, on the comic, and so on. After Kant, apart from the second-rate philosophers. Those who wrote on aesthetics were Fichte, Schelling, and Hegel, and their followers. For Fichte, who lived from 1762 to 1814, our sense of the beautiful arises in this way. The world, that is to say nature, has two sides. It is the product of our limitation, and it is the product of our free, ideal activity. Seen the first way, the world is bounded. Seen the second way, it is free. Seen the first way, every body is bounded, distorted, squeezed, and cramped, and we see ugliness. Seen the second way, we see inner fullness, life, renewal. We see beauty. So the ugliness or the beauty of a thing depends, for Fichte, on the point of view of the one who beholds it. And therefore beauty lies not in the world, but in the beautiful soul. Art is the showing forth of that beautiful soul, and its aim is the forming not only of the mind, which is the work of the scholar, and not only of the heart, which is the work of the moral preacher, but of the whole man. So the mark of beauty lies in nothing external. It lies in the presence of a beautiful soul, in the artist. After Fichte, and in the same direction, come Friedrich Schlegel and Adam Müller. For Schlegel, who lived from 1778 to 1829, beauty in art is grasped far too narrowly, too one-sidedly, too much in isolation. Beauty is found not only in art, but also in nature and in love. So the truly beautiful is expressed in the union of art, nature, and love, and therefore inseparably from aesthetic art, Schlegel recognizes a moral art and a philosophical art. For Adam Müller, who lived from 1779 to 1829, there are two beauties. One is a general beauty, which draws people as the sun draws the planets. That is chiefly the beauty of antiquity. The other is an individual beauty, which becomes beauty because the beholder himself becomes a sun that draws beauty to him. That is the beauty of modern art. A world in which all contradictions are reconciled is the highest beauty, and every work of art is a repetition of that universal harmony. The highest art is the art of living. After Fichte and his followers comes a philosopher of the same generation who has had a great influence on the aesthetic ideas of our time. That is Schelling, who lived from 1775 to 1854. For Schelling, art is the product or the consequence of that view of the world in which the subject turns into its own object, or the object becomes its own subject. Beauty is the presentation of the infinite in the finite, and the chief character of a work of art is unconscious infinity. Art is the joining of the subjective with the objective, of nature with reason, of the unconscious with the conscious. And so art is the highest means of knowledge. Beauty is the contemplation of things in themselves, as they exist at the root of all things, in their archetypes. The beautiful is not produced by the artist through his knowledge or his will. It is produced in him by the idea of beauty itself. The most notable of Schelling's followers was Solger, who lived from 1780 to 1819 and gave lectures on aesthetics. For Solger, the idea of beauty is the fundamental idea of everything. In the world we see only distortions of that fundamental idea, whereas art, by imagination, can rise to the height of it. And so art is a likeness of creation. For another follower of Schelling, Krauss, who lived from 1781 to 1832, true and real beauty is the showing forth of the idea in an individual form. Art is the realizing of beauty in the sphere of the free human spirit. And the highest form of art is the art of living, which directs its work towards the adorning of life, so that life may be a beautiful dwelling place for a beautiful man. After Schelling and his followers, there begins a new doctrine of aesthetics, the doctrine of Hegel. It holds its ground to this day, consciously in many people and unconsciously in most. This teaching is no clearer and no more definite than the ones before it. If anything, and it hardly seems possible, it is even foggier and more mystical. For Hegel, who lived from 1770 to 1831, God shows himself in nature and in art, in the form of beauty. God expresses himself in two ways, in the object and in the subject, in nature and in spirit. Beauty is the shining of the idea through matter. Truly beautiful is only spirit, and whatever partakes of spirit. So the beauty of nature is merely a reflection of the beauty proper to spirit. The beautiful has spiritual content, and nothing else. But the spiritual must appear in sensuous form, and the sensuous appearance of spirit is mere seeming. That seeming is the only reality the beautiful has. So art is the realizing of this seeming of the idea, and it is a means together with religion and philosophy, of bringing to consciousness and putting into words the deepest tasks of mankind and the highest truths of the spirit. Truth and beauty for Hegel are one and the same. The only difference is that truth is the idea itself, as it exists in itself and can be thought. But the idea, when it appears outwardly, becomes for consciousness not only true, but beautiful. The beautiful is the idea made manifest. Hegel is followed by a crowd of disciples: Weiss, Arnold Ruge, Rosenkranz, Theodor Vischer, and others. For Weiss, who lived from 1801 to 1867, art is the bringing of the absolutely spiritual essence of beauty into external, dead, indifferent matter, the very notion of which, apart from the beauty brought into it, is the negation of all being in itself. In the idea of truth, says Weiss, there lies a contradiction between the subjective and the objective sides of knowledge, in that a single eye knows the all-existing. That contradiction can be removed by a concept that would unite in one the moment of universality and the moment of unity, which in the idea of truth fall apart into two. Such a concept would be truth reconciled, and beauty is precisely that reconciled truth. For Ruge, who lived from 1802 to 1880 and was a strict follower of Hegel, beauty is the idea expressing itself. Either finds itself fully expressed, and then that full expression of itself is beauty, or it finds itself expressed incompletely, and then it feels the need to change its imperfect expression, and so becomes creative art. For Vischer, who lived from 1807 to 1887, beauty is the idea in the form of a limited appearance. The idea itself is not one and indivisible. It forms a system of ideas, which can be pictured as an ascending and a descending line. The higher the idea, the more beauty it holds. But even the lowest holds beauty, because it forms a necessary link in the system. The highest form of the idea is personality, and therefore the highest art is the art whose subject is the highest personality. Such are the German theories of aesthetics in the one Hegelian direction, but they do not exhaust the subject. Alongside the Hegelian theories there appear in Germany, at the same time, theories of beauty that not only reject Hegel's position, that beauty is the manifestation of the idea and art the expression of that idea, but stand flatly against it, deny it, and mock it. Such are Herbart and, above all, Schopenhauer. For Herbart, who lived from 1766 to 1841, there is no beauty in itself, and there can be none. There is only our judgment, and what we must do is find the foundations of that judgment, the elementary aesthetic judgment. Those foundations lie in the relations between impressions. There are certain relations that we call beautiful, and art consists in finding them, relations that are simultaneous in painting, in sculpture, and in architecture, both successive and simultaneous in music, and purely successive in poetry. Against the earlier writers, Herbart holds that beautiful objects are often those which express nothing whatever. The rainbow, for instance, is beautiful for its line and its colors, and not at all for what it means in the myth of Iris or in the story of Noah. Another opponent of Hegel was Schopenhauer, who rejected Hegel's whole system, his aesthetics included. For Schopenhauer, who lived from 1788 to 1860, the will makes itself objective in the world at different levels. The higher the level of that objectification, the more beautiful it is, yet every level has its own beauty. To let go of one's own individuality and to contemplate one of these levels of the will's appearing is to have a consciousness of beauty. All men, says Schopenhauer, have the power to know this idea at its various levels, and by that power to be released for a while from their own personality. The genius of the artist has this power to the highest degree, and therefore shows forth the highest beauty. After these more prominent writers come men of less originality and less influence: Hartmann, Kirchmann, Schnaze, in part Helmholtz, Bergman, Jungmann, and countless others. For Hartmann, born in 1842, beauty lies neither in the outer world, nor in the thing in itself, nor in the soul of man, but in the seeming that the artist produces. The thing in itself is not beautiful. The artist turns it into beauty. For Schnaze, he lived from 1798 to 1875, there is no beauty in the world. In nature there is only an approach to it. Art gives what nature cannot give. Beauty appears in the activity of the free eye, which is conscious of a harmony that nature does not have. Kirchmann wrote an aesthetics based on experience. For Kirchmann, who lived from 1802 to 1884, there are 6 domains of history: the domain of knowledge, the domain of wealth, the domain of morality, the domain of faith, the domain of politics, and the domain of beauty. Activity in that last domain is art. For Helmholtz, born in 1821, who wrote about beauty in relation to music, beauty in a musical work is achieved without exception by following laws, but those laws are not known to the artist. So beauty appears in the artist unconsciously and cannot be subjected to analysis. For Bergman, born in 1840, in his book on the beautiful published in 1887, beauty cannot be defined objectively. Beauty is known subjectively, and so the task of aesthetics is to establish what pleases whom. For Jungmann, who died in 1885, beauty is first of all a supersensuous quality. Secondly, beauty produces pleasure in us by contemplation alone, and thirdly, beauty is the ground of love. The theories of aesthetics among the French, the English, and other peoples, as their chief representatives have set them out in recent times, are these. In France during this period, the leading writers on aesthetics were Cousin, Jouffroy, Pictet, Ravissant, and Lévesque. Cousin, who lived from 1792 to 1867, was an eclectic and a follower of the German idealists. In his theory, beauty always has a moral foundation. He refutes the position that art is imitation and that the beautiful is whatever pleases. He maintains that beauty can be defined in itself and that its essence lies in variety and in unity. After Cousin, Jouffroy wrote on aesthetics. He lived from 1796 to 1842, and he too was a follower of German aesthetics and a pupil of Cousin. By his definition, beauty is the expression of the invisible by means of the natural signs that reveal it. The visible world is the garment through which we see beauty. The Swiss writer Pictet, who also wrote on art, repeats Hegel and Plato. He places beauty in the direct and free showing forth of the divine idea, which reveals itself in sensuous images. Lévesque is a follower of Schelling and Hegel. For him, beauty is something invisible, hidden within nature. Force, or spirit, is the manifestation of ordered energy. Judgments just as vague about the essence of beauty were uttered by the French metaphysician Ravissant, who takes beauty to be the final aim of the world. The most divine and above all the most perfect beauty, he says, contains the secret. Beauty, in his view, is the purpose of the world. The whole world, he writes, is the work of an absolute beauty, which is the cause of things only through the love that it puts into them. I would rather not render these metaphysical phrases into plain speech at all, and I do so with reluctance. However cloudy the Germans may be, the French, once they have read their fill of the Germans and set about imitating them, go far beyond them. They weld unrelated ideas together and slip one under the other without caring. So the French philosopher Renouvier, also discussing beauty, says this: "Let us not be afraid to say that a truth which was not beautiful would be nothing but a logical game of our minds, and that the only solid truth, the only one worthy of the name, is beauty." Besides these idealist writers, who wrote and still write under the influence of German philosophy, several others in France have lately shaped the way art and beauty are understood. Taine, Guyot, Cherbulier, Coster, and Véron. For Taine, who lived from 1828 to 1893, beauty is the showing forth of the essential character of some significant idea, shown more completely than it is expressed in reality. For Guyot, who lived from 1854 to 1888, beauty is not something foreign to the object, not a parasite growing on it, but the very flowering of the thing on which it appears. And art is the expression of a life reasonable and conscious, which calls out in us, on the one hand, the deepest sensations of existence, and on the other, the highest feelings and the loftiest thoughts. Art lifts a man out of his personal life into the universal life, not only through sharing the same ideas and beliefs, but through sharing the same feelings. For Cherbulier, art is an activity that does three things. It satisfies our inborn love of appearances. It brings ideas into those appearances. And it gives pleasure at one and the same time to our senses, our heart, and our reason. Beauty, for Cherbulier, is not inherent in objects. It is an act of our soul. Beauty is an illusion. There is no absolute beauty. What seems beautiful to us is what seems characteristic and harmonious. For Coster, the ideas of beauty, of goodness, and of truth are innate. These ideas light up our minds and are identical with God, who is goodness, truth, and beauty. And the idea of beauty takes in unity of essence, variety of constituent elements, and the order that brings unity into the varied manifestations of life. For the sake of completeness, I will bring in a few of the very latest writings on art. There is The Psychology of the Beautiful and of Art, by Mario Pillo, published in 1895. For Mario Pillo, beauty is a product of our physical senses, and the aim of art is enjoyment. But this enjoyment, for some reason, is held without question to be highly moral. Then there are the essays on contemporary art by Ferenc Gevart, published in 1897. According to him, art depends on its link with the past and on the religious ideal that the artist of today sets before himself, while giving his work the form of his own individuality. Then there is Sar Paladin's book on idealist and mystical art, published in 1894. For Paladin, beauty is one of the expressions of God. There is no other reality, he writes, than God. There is no other truth than God. There is no other beauty than God. The book is very fanciful and very ignorant, but it is characteristic in the positions it takes, and worth noting for the success it has had among young people in France. Such are all the aesthetic theories current in France down to the present day. One exception stands out for its clarity and its good sense: Véron's book on aesthetics, published in 1878. It does not define art exactly, but at least it clears away from aesthetics the foggy notion of an absolute beauty. For Véron, who lived from 1825 to 1889, art is the showing forth of feeling, carried outward through a combination of lines, forms, and colors, or through a succession of gestures, sounds, or words, governed by certain rhythms. In England during this period, the writers on aesthetics defined beauty more and more often, not by qualities belonging to it, but by taste, and the question of beauty is replaced by the question of taste. After Reid, who lived from 1704 to 1796, and held that beauty depends entirely on the beholder, Alison, in his book on the nature and principles of taste, published in 1790, argues the same thing. Who lived from 1731 to 1802, and was the grandfather of the famous Charles, asserts the same from another side. He says that we find beautiful whatever is bound up in our minds with what we love. Richard Knight's analytical inquiry into the principles of taste, published in 1805, goes the same way. And most of the English theories of aesthetics go the same way. The leading English writers on aesthetics at the beginning of this century have been Charles Darwin in part, and then Spencer, Morley, Grant Allen, Caird, and Knight. For Charles Darwin, who lived from 1809 to 1883, in his Descent of Man, published in 1871, beauty is a feeling that belongs not to man alone, but to animals as well, and therefore to the forefathers of man. Birds decorate their nests and appraise beauty in their mates. Beauty has an influence on mating. Beauty takes in a range of different characters, and the art of music began in the call of the male to the female. For Spencer, born in 1820, the origin of art is play, a thought already voiced by Schiller. In the lower animals, all the energy of life is spent on keeping life going and passing it on. In man, once those needs are met, a surplus of strength remains. That surplus goes into play, and play passes over into art. Play is an imitation of real action, and so is art. The source of aesthetic pleasure, according to Spencer, is threefold. First, whatever exercises a sense, sight, or another in the fullest way, with the least harm for the greatest exercise. Second, the greatest variety of feelings aroused. And third, the joining of the first two with the idea that flows from them. For Todhunter, in his Theory of the Beautiful, published in 1872, beauty is an endless loveliness, which we know both by reason and by the enthusiasm of love. But whether we recognize beauty as beauty depends on taste, and that cannot be settled by anything. The only approach to a definition is the greatest cultivation in men, and what cultivation is has no definition. As for the essence of art, of what moves us by means of lines, colors, sounds, and words, it is not the product of blind forces, but of reasonable ones which help one another towards a reasonable end. Beauty is the reconciling of contradictions. For Morley, in his sermons preached before the University of Oxford, published in 1876, beauty lies in the soul of man. Nature tells us of the divine, and art is the hieroglyphic expression of the divine. For Grant Allen, in his Physiological Aesthetics, published in 1877, who carries on the work of Spencer, beauty has a physical origin. He says that aesthetic pleasure comes from the contemplation of the beautiful, and that the idea of the beautiful is got by a physiological process. The beginning of art is play. With a surplus of physical strength, a man gives himself up to play. With a surplus of receptive power, he gives himself up to the work of art. The beautiful is what gives the greatest stimulation at the least cost. Differences in the appraisal of beauty come from taste. Taste can be trained. We must trust the judgment of the most finely nurtured and most discriminating men, those best able to appraise. It is these men who form the taste of the coming generation. For Caird, in his essay on the philosophy of art, published in 1883, beauty gives us the means of grasping the objective world completely, without having to relate it to other parts of the world, as science must always do. And so art destroys the contradiction between unity and multiplicity, between the law and the phenomenon, between subject and object, by joining them into one. Art is the manifestation and the confirmation of freedom, because it is free from the darkness and the impenetrability of finite things. For Knight, in his Philosophy of the Beautiful, published in 1893, beauty is, as with Schelling, the joining of object and subject. It is the drawing out from nature of what is proper to man, and the recognition in oneself of what is common to all nature. The judgments about beauty and art copied out here are far from exhausting what has been written on the subject. Besides which, new writers on aesthetics appear every day, and in the judgments of these new writers there is the same strange, bewitched murkiness, the same contradiction in defining beauty. Some, by sheer inertia, carry on the mystical aesthetics of Baumgarten and Hegel with various modifications. Others move the question into the subjective realm and look for the foundations of the beautiful in matters of taste. A third group, the aestheticians of the very newest formation, look for the origin of beauty in physiological laws, and a fourth group considers the question in complete independence of the idea of beauty. So with Sully, in his Studies in Psychology and Aesthetics, published in 1874, the idea of beauty is abolished altogether. Art, by Sully's definition, is the production of a lasting or a passing object that is able to give active joy and a pleasant impression to a certain number of spectators or listeners, quite apart from any advantage gained.